welcome. Welcome to, obviously, the students, but also to the visitors. I know we have two from cohort 4 at the back, so they're joining us very, very soon. We've got a visiting scholar from UCL, is that correct? Sorry? From Goldsmiths, welcome. Glad you could be here. Obviously, colleagues, Tamsin, cohort 2, and also works at Cambridge Research Ventures, Doug, you know, and the team. And Katie, the librarian, out of the library again, never in the library. Roving librarian, seemingly. Welcome. This is the last session of the day, and it is always, I think, one of the best, one of my favourites. Glen, Jenkins, who works at Marsh Farm in Luton. We have known each other for over a decade. We first met when I was chief executive of Keystone, and I gave a talk, I can't remember where it was, Milton Keynes, Luton, somewhere like that. And Glen has some pithy opinions on chief executives of organisations in poor places, and he shared those opinions very nicely with me. It took me to task. It was the first time I met him. But when Glen takes people to task, he always does it in a very special way, which you will see. It's never conflictual. It's conflictual, but in a very special way. Then Glen and I spent a number of years on a ministerial national community forum, where we had great sport, along with a few other people, in goading civil servants and being as difficult as possible, trying to get the message of, challenge communities onto a ministerial agenda, which was a good few years. Since then, Michelle and I have been to interview Glen, the longest interview I'm sure, in the history of the universe. 7 hours, I think it was. Imogen.
Like Hugo Chavez.
Imogen, who from cohort 1 did her dissertation with Glen, his organisation. And Michelle is working on a comic on Glen and his organisation's work. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Glen, and over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, I know this is your graveyard shift, as in end of a very busy few. So if I can see anyone falling asleep, I'll roll this up and throw it up the top so we can keep you awake. No, thank you for having me. I've just drove down here. I've drove about, I think it's about 25 miles, 30 miles from Luton. Does anyone know Luton? Does anybody in here know Luton? Yeah. Okay, so Luton is a town. It used to be a car town, Vauxhall town. That's shrunken now. It's an Amazon town now, but it used to be a Vauxhall town. And I grew up there and started work there in 1979, which was the same year in the UK as Margaret Thatcher started work in the UK as the Prime Minister. And because my own background, my family have got a trade union background. My mum and dad were both shop stewards, and I was a train driver. I became a train driver, trainee, when I was 16. So, mum and dad, train driver, I obviously joined ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, and started to get involved, not knowing that was probably one of the most hectic times to ever start getting involved in trade unionism, was when Margaret Thatcher was starting work in the same month as I did. So that led to 1982, me being immersed in a strike. And that strike was about, what it was really about was Margaret Thatcher's attack on the trade union movement, which culminated in 1984 with the miners' strike in Britain. And unbeknownst to us, that was what was down the line. So we were kind of the first softer target, if you like. And at that stage of my life, I was only 18. And I was confronted with a new reality, because I grew up believing the newspapers, thinking the TV told the truth, thinking police were always legal, etc. And that sort of young, fresh view of the world was pretty much taken to task in 1982, when the whole of the state, it seemed to me, newspapers, judges, every angle of the police, everybody converged onto us to attack us. And that made me realise that nothing's as independent as it seems in this country. There's a kind of like power block that works in sync when a threat arrives, and we were seen as that threat. In 1984, I had an even deeper immersion in the state when I was involved heavily in the miners' strike. And I spent time in pit villages throughout the country, down from Kent up to North, and I saw things that made my hair stand on end. And by the way, my brother's a policeman, and I saw more policemen in this strike, hundreds of thousands of policemen, when, funny at that time, there were serious crimes going on in Cambridge. And we used to say to the police, why aren't you in Cambridge, man? You know, because there was some serious crime going on there at the time, which was high profile. But the police, it showed me again that the police are actually agents of the state and defending state interests, rather than what I grew up believing and my brother believed, that we were just there to serve and protect the community. So I had this young washing machine of experience going on in my life that made my, if you like, class consciousness emerge and awaken me. And I come out the other end of that with the government privatising the railway where I was working, which was what it was all about, ultimately, and serious defeat in terms of privatisation. So I left the railway in 1989. And at that point, I entered a long-term period of unemployment because I was used to a unionised, rights-bound workplace. When I came out of there and went into the wider world, in more casual jobs and not so unionised jobs, it was like a bad dream. You know, you had no rights, etc., compared to what I've been used to. So, long story short, I ended up with a long period of unemployment, several years of unemployment. And by unemployment, I mean after a couple of years, I got into some criminal activity, selling weed, things like that, yeah, when I was younger. And then you start to realise what's going on in my life, man. Do you know what I mean? I was this activist, and now I was a criminal. And somewhat there, in fact, I was part of a big group of people who were different activists from different parts of their life, Irish republicanism through to being beat up in prison, all these experiences that made us rebellious and class conscious, etc. But we were criminals all of a sudden. And that felt like a big trap. It felt like a you know, them, what they called them lotus plants that trap you. It was like that. And that made me look differently at the prohibition of drugs, etc. I saw that as something which was this big Venus flytrap for rebellious energy, and it was all being channeled. So I was going through this washing machine of different experiences, and I was part of a pool of long-term unemployed people. And at some point, around about 1991, we thought, do you know what? No one's going to do anything for us. We're going to have to do this for ourselves. And around us in Luton, at that time, post-Thatcher, 92, there was not only loads of empty workspaces that had all been closed down or reduced, Vauxhall, etc., warehouses everywhere, farms everywhere that had been closed down. You know what I mean? Old hospices that had been closed down. And they were all around our town. So had all these unproductive people and all these wasted buildings. And we started to look around us and think, you know, and by the way, we were totally excluded from the mainstream entertainment because it was so expensive. And we were on benefits and long-term unemployed. So you had this big excluded group of people, massive group of people, and empty buildings, etc. So they married, the natural happened. We started to occupy pieces of land around Bedfordshire, and we formed ourselves into a sound system, but a movement with a sound system at its heart. And this is what Exodus, we called ourselves the Exodus Collective, movement of JAH people from Bob Marley. And you see, a bit of a fuzzy picture, but you can see that farm there was a farm we squatted, which we eventually got licensed, called Longmeadow Community Farm. It was a derelict there. We restored it using housing benefits money, using money that would otherwise have been paid to a landlord to put us up in a house with drippy taps and all that. We used that money, we set up a housing co-op and restored this building. And you can see on the front there's jeeps and what looks like a tank, but it's actually a UN ferret. These were used to lead our convoys for our dances, because when we started the dances in June the 5th, 92, within 6 months they'd grown to 10,000 people from our town and surrounding areas. And we were convoying using these jeeps and these lorries to transport the sound system. across the county to any predestined site what the police couldn't know about, right? And had to be secret, so there was only a few people knowing. We would follow, the convoy would follow us. Collective security for surety. There's too many of us for you to stop. And crucially, it was a non-violent movement. Violence is for them, we used to say. Leave that to them, but make sure you film them when they do it. So this non-violent stance, dance with a stance, we called it, Exodus movement of JAH people, began its land occupations in '92. And very quickly, while we're occupying these sites, bags of people who are coming are homeless and unemployed. And some of the sites we were occupying were an insult to the fact there's unemployed and homeless people. So we began doing stuff like the money we would raise from the dance, which was raised twofold, one through the bar, unlicensed bar, but protest bar. Mainly the money would come through there. And a bucket on the door, pound for the sound, we would say, if you got it. Because it was excluded people who were skint, yeah? So pound for the sound if you got it. And we'd get a couple of grand out of that and a 4 or 5 grand off the bar if it was a big dance. Now you can imagine to us, that's like unheard of amount of money. So collectively, we had this collective resource, and from that, the collective grew and grew and grew. Till it was hundreds of people across our town actively involved. People would come up and say, I'm a mechanic, can I fix the lorries? I'm a sound man, can I get... Do you know what I mean? It was something people wanted to be part of because it was a stance. It was standing up for our rights, and it was great fun as well. Best dances you've ever been to. We'd come to one of these pits in the morning and hear the beats, and thousands of people in unison dancing. There's something ancient about it. There's something positively human about it. And you'll know if you've ever been that it kind of leads to a release, which nothing else can. If you go to a nightclub after, you think, oh, the nightclub's crap, man, compared to that, yeah? So, that's Exodus. That's part of my background. This Exodus movement from '92, as I say, because it grew so fast, and we started squatting places to live. Here's a few images from... What's gone on there? It's gone off. Oh, sorry. Okay, there's me up the top with my shades on. So that sound system there was called our wall. Yeah, we still got that. We're called Leviticus now, the next chapter. We're a bit older. Right? So this sound system, that's our wall. There's us in Hackney. That's us squatting a forest. And these dances would be attended by thousands and thousands of people. Housing Action Zone. This was the housing co-op we formed. In the name is what it says, Housing Action. And this was about squatting and occupying those buildings which were too good to leave. And we would self-fund them, but people would put £10 from their benefits, we'd match it with £10 out of the bucket or the bar. So to us, that was supporting the homeless. To the police, it was igniting and inciting rebellion or squatting or whatever, illegal, whatever they would call it. So the Housing Action Zone was formed as an arm of the Exodus Collective. This is where I live, Marsh Farm. In 1995, there was riots. And those riots were the result of, as they always are, the result of a drip, 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 drip conflict between the kids locally and the police. And we were campaigning at that time, Exodus, for a community centre in the middle of our estate to be opened. It was an old factory, closed down factory. And we were campaigning for it to be used as a community enterprise centre, managed and run by local people, not by the council. And that was our campaign. And one night I came home from a planning application for that, and the streets were on fire in Marsh Farm. When I got back, there'd been an incident with the kids and the police, and the next thing, there's cars burning. I got back, I went to the kids to speak to what's going on, and just as I said that, it was like an army arrived. And you've got to realise this was '95, so we'd never seen a police helicopter with white lights before. They're common now, but we'd never seen one. And all of a sudden, from 50 kids burning a car, there was like 1,000, it seemed, probably 500 police emerged onto the estate in columns, helicopters. Because obviously they'd had a change of mind in how they were going to deal with these kind of incidents. That blew up into 3 nights of rioting. The Thursday, the Friday, and the Saturday night was due to come. On the night, the Saturday night, we had a dance scheduled, which was due to go 2.5 miles away from the Marsh Farm. And we had a big discussion about whether it's right to do that because riots are the voice of the unheard, etc., etc. But we felt, nah, this is a provocation, a deliberate one. The police's change in strategy was a deliberate provocation, we felt. And they'd come in with a heavy hand to kind of stamp an example on us. And the reaction that inevitably came, people were being filmed and eviction notices the next day through their door for the whole family because the kid had been involved in throwing bricks at the police. So to us, it felt like social cleansing was going on. It felt like they're trying to get the stand-up people. Do you know what I mean? It felt like that. So we decided we will put the dance on. And we made a public statement and we said, don't go to these riots. This is a spark that the police have poured petrol on to make a fire. Don't fall for it. Come away, come out, right? And at 4 o'clock that morning, there was 5,000 people at our dance that night. And at 4 o'clock, the local BBC radio phoned me and they said there's about 1,000 police on Marsh Farm and nobody else. They were just standing there like lemons, waiting. And we've even got film. Someone went down and filmed of them saying, where is everyone? Well, I think they've gone to a rave down the road. So look, the reason I'm mentioning that now is because it was the first most powerful example of how an organised community from the bottom up can bring relief to a situation which top-downism by the police, by the council, by the government, by the army, could only have made it worse. It would only have got worse. Friday was bad. Saturday was due to be terrible. There was people injured. There was all sorts of things going on. So we put the dance on, and as you can see, if you look 3 paragraphs from the bottom, although Bedfordshire Police were helped by the Metropolitan Police Riot Squad, the situation was eventually brought under control when rave organisers from Exodus Collective staged an impromptu party out of town, which attracted 1,500 young people from the area. 5,000 probably, but. So there's an example of the power of a community taking a decision to not do something and resolving a situation that they just never could have. All of this doesn't go without opposition. Neil said I deal with them quite nicely, but this wasn't nice. This was a drug plant, as well as 66 other charges that were brought against us. Every one of them, I swear to you, was fraudulent. There was police writing false statements. This drug plant, the police were so determined to stop us, and I want to flag something up with you to tell you why. I want you to think about why. They were so determined to stop us, they arrived at our house one night. We're queuing up ready to go, and they arrived with 200 police at our house, at the farmhouse. All first we knew was all lights went off. The next thing, they're entering the house, and they've took everybody away. And do you know what they did? They put 2 bags of ecstasy, which is the rave drug, into one of our members who lived at the house, into his passport, driving licence, and tenancy agreement, in the same bag. So I ask you, yeah, you're on a 19-acre farm. If you were selling drugs, the last place you're going to leave them is in your bag with your passport, your driving licence and your tenancy agreement. And we then found out through trial, through cross-examining the officers, that what they'd actually done, the reason they turned the lights off is because the guy who made sure the lights were off, went in and planted the drugs and then led a young officer on his first day on the drug squad to find them using the beam of a torch. So this guy follows innocently the beam of the torch. Oh, I found these E's. Oh, good man. Well, there's 2 problems with that. First, he'd found 2 sets of drugs in 2 minutes in a dark house. And they were synchronising their watches. But because they knew the convoy was coming, because everyone had heard, they've raided the farm. It had to be quick. So they dumped the drugs, bang, bang, bang. And when we got to court, we're saying, are you a sniffer dog? How did you find them in 2 minutes, in 2 different places in the dark? And it was him himself who realised, I was following the beam of the torch. Well, it became obvious then what had happened, and all charges were dropped. That failed. 66 other charges either failed or were dropped, leading to a campaign by us, which was eventually taken on by the council, for a civil rights inquiry, chaired by Michael Mansfield, into how this kind of assault was going down on a group of young people, local people, helping ourselves, and doing good things, stopping riots, for example, in the community. So I wanted to give you that background, and I wanted to ask you a question at this stage. Why were they so determined to stop us? Why, when we were going week after week, legalise it, licence it? Why did they not like that? And the answer is, because every time we play and there's more than a couple of thousand people there, the pub and club profits in Bedfordshire drop by 40%. Because everyone's down the sandpit, having a much better time. And they don't like that. They're thinking, this bottom-up stuff takes our market away. And that's why I've given you that background, and the subject of my talk today, is cracking the monopoly. Because they got a monopoly on everything we do. Every social ill we've got, an industry develops on the back of it. Service providers. Whether it be commercial service providers or public service providers, an industry develops on the back of every social ill we have. And instead of the funds that governments, etc., put to alleviate that problem, those funds largely help the provider rather than the beneficiaries, allegedly, of those funds. Is everyone with me? That's a background, yeah, as to why I got into bottom-up development, by the people, for the people. Because I know it works, I know the success of it, I know it's warmer. Eventually, after 8 years of non-violent civil disobedience, land occupations, etc., we scored a good victory, man, with the Duke of Bedford, the biggest landowner, one of them in England, I think, but definitely in Bedfordshire. He responded to our call to let's do some partnership around this. Because, if I'm honest with you, because he had a golf tournament coming up with Tiger Woods, and we kept playing right next to the 18th hole. So he felt compelled to speak to us. And after about 6 operations to stop us, he thought, okay, let's talk to them. And when we did talk, he was a great guy. He is a great guy. He's my friend now. And he was completely at odds with what he'd been told about us when he met us, how we really were, right? And as you can see, after months of discussion with the police, Mid-Beds and the landowner, they granted us our licence. So after 8 years civil disobedience as Exodus Collective, we won that. And I'm unaware of any other situation in the UK where you go 8 years of civil disobedience and then win. Okay, so how long have I been, Neil? Okay, well, what I wanted to quickly do for you, because I don't want to waffle, right? I wanted to just let you think about that and let you hear a bit of music. Because of all that background, in sometime in the 90s or whatever, we held a criminal justice, anti-criminal justice bill, which criminal justice bill was about closing down outside events like ours. Apparently for safety, but really for the safety of the profits of the club owners and that, as I've explained. That was a real safety. They'd say it was about safety of the kids, but really it was about safety of profits. And we held a criminal justice thing, and these guys arrived on a motorbike and started talking. There was loads of people from all over the country came. And it turned out they were from the band called The Levellers. Has anyone ever heard of The Levellers, the band, yeah? Well, The Levellers are a big name, festival-sourced band from Britain. I didn't even know who they were, but he came and see us. He spent a weekend with us. And then about a month, 6 months later, I got a jiffy bag in the post, and it said, "Play this loud, we wrote it with you in mind." Right, so, and it was a song. And I think it got to number 28 in the charts or something silly like that. But I want to let you hear it because, one, it's a bit more relaxing than hearing me speak. And two, the lyrics tell the story I've just told.
he's back.
Go. I wanted to play that, one, to break it up, but two, to say that it was good for us at that stage to know that there was people from afar, if you like, not only not understanding where we were, because we was under serious attack, Freemasons, the lot, there was all in there, and knowing there's people out there. Because Luton's a beer town, by the way, and a leisure Freemasons locally, etc. And because we was under this mighty attack from mighty forces in our town, newspaper headlines, all of it, it was good to know there's people at home and away that were with us and could see what we were really doing. So that was a potent time for us there. Revolution, as you can see. So now, that background, this is the second part of my talk, when then I'm going to shut up and ask for some questions and answers. But that background grounded us in what you could call bottom-up development, what we call bottom-up development. And we call it the revolution, yeah? And revolution is all about self-provision. It's all about we can manage our own space better than can be managed for us. We can provide services to support our neighbour better than the current ones that are going on, etc. We can stop riots where you can only make them worse. So all of those lessons we started to bring into the estate we live in. And the estate we live in, Marsh Farm, you see the riots from '95, was one of the most deprived, they say, I'll say they say, and you'll see why in a minute, in the southeast of England. And our poverty indices, as they call them, were very high. And it was like an ugly competition to get this fund called New Deal for Communities from the government, where you had to say, we're so bad, the crime's so high, and this is so high, and unemployment's so high that we need support. So there was this kind of like, how bad are you competition for all the country's poorest estates. And 39 of them, we was one of them, were given opportunities to bid for this change making. Now, we'd been campaigning for this community centre, the Ark. And that was this factory in the middle of the estate I mentioned earlier. It was a massive 100,000 square foot building. And we were saying that this should be used using the same basic principles of local self-help to be turned into a new centre. And I've put this here for a reason, because the lesson from Exodus about what we call now plugging our local economic leaks, yeah, if you invest energy and time in providing an alternative, the people who are already providing that service get pissed off pretty quickly, especially if you do it better than them, right? And self-help does reach the parts that top-downism can't reach. So you find this resistance from existing providers. And we developed this we work with New Economics Foundation on this. This shows you in a community where all of the money that gets poured in goes straight back out again. in the way of external contractors, external service providers, external everything. It's as though we in the community ain't got no skills. We've got no wherewithal. We're all thick, you know, we're all sort of like to be tended to and provided to. And I hope you can see what I'm saying there. It's what Neil talks about when I'm not anti-chief exec, but I'm anti-dependency culture and people thinking that we all need to be provided to rather than giving us the grease to help us provide for ourselves, which is much more fruitful. So this runs throughout the theme of what I'm about to get into. So Marsh Farm, methopoly, yeah. Now, as I said earlier, yeah, everything in our community is monopolised by somebody. We did a survey called Plug in the Leak survey, spending survey, and we asked people, where do you spend your annual money? First of all, we asked people to guess how much was in the community, and people were miles out. There was actually 90 odd million a year going through our community, through our 9,300 household community, in pensions, wages, etc., plus public funding for the fire service, the police, etc., just for our area. You're talking like 90 odd million pound back in 2006. So this was big money going through. But as the bucket shows you, it goes back out. Well, methopoly, when people visit, rather than me chatting for a few hours, we play a game where people can see from landing on each monopoly square different social enterprise projects, different initiatives that are designed to reverse that monopoly. Marsh Farmopoly, we call it, that's why it's called methopoly. Okay, so this is a kind of innovative way of not boring people to death in telling the story. They play a game, and by the time they finish this game, all the cards they've landed on, which they read out, everyone gets a good broad understanding in a fun way. So we created this for those reasons, because we wanted to advocate bottom-up development in all areas. This is when we finally won the right for that centre, that old factory in the middle, to be brought into use as a community enterprise and development centre by the people for the people. That's like the hoodies taking over there. Yeah, so, and as you can see behind it, that's what was the factory. MF stands for Marsh Farm Community Development Trust. So we won this money from government over 10 years on the back of this proposal to transform this building. That's how it is now. And that is, I think it's the UK's largest single community-owned building in the country. It's amazing in terms of its job creation. It's created 116 jobs, which is about a couple of million into our local economy, into our bucket every year that wasn't there before. It draws in 410 grand a year rents. It's full up to the brim. We deliberately mix community enterprise with localised services like police, fire, ambulance, town hall, have all got a space in there, small space. But for one, it localises the service and allows us to do it without going downtown, so it saves us a whole bag of dough on the bus or the taxi or whatever. And two, it makes them more accountable when they're local, like the police walking around the estate and being based in the estate, a bit of a different experience to driving in from 5 miles away. It ends that sort of we're a gang, you're a gang mindset. Back to the old days when police used to live in communities, that's what we was thinking. And they give us 12 grand a year rent towards the building, so that's good as well. That's inside the building. As you can see, it's a beautiful building. But, and it's a big but, when it became so successful, the old deal, this was New Deal for communities. New Deal being bottom up, communities managing ourselves. This is our generator to provide the resources, space and training skills, capacity building to be able to do that. And having to run a centre like that is the way communities learn how to, you know, if you outsource driving your car to a chauffeur, you'll never learn to drive. If you outsource management of your centres to the council, you'll never learn to self-manage. So the whole theme of New Deal was, we're going to do this and we're going to run it by the people for the people. So we're going to have to be innovative because we don't want small groups of residents running it, the new council if you like. You want big groups of residents involved in decision making. And here's the challenge about cracking the monopoly. There's another monopoly which is the democratic, in inverted commas, massive ones. Inverted commas, democracy. Democracy in Marsh Farm reminds me of, you know what I mean, a flower on the road that's been run over 1,000 times. It's just there, but it's not doing anything. And democracy is like that. Once every 5 years, you vote for a council, etc. Same old stuff. Representative democracy. It's had its day in the UK, particularly at a local level. So our challenge is, how do we spark a more participatory, involved community? And this building is at the heart of that, very much at the heart of that, because it generates the resources, it's got the space. At the moment, it generates about 180 grand a year for us in terms of surplus, yeah, because we own it. But the but is that the council, the councillors, and their partners, if you like, never shared that vision of this building, A, working, and B, being so successful. But when it was, they've been on it like limpets, and they've resisted the change from what you call a foundation charity. When you set it up, it has just trustees can vote. When you move on and you've built the building now, then it's supposed to become what they call an association charity, where all of the beneficiaries from it are members. They've resisted that with everything. Worse than Remain Brexit. It's worse. Right, this going off down there, they've resisted it for years, passionate resist. Oh, no. All the reasons you could imagine. They don't like it because they want to stay in control. This is another crucial part of the centre and the bottom-up development process. So here's a challenge. If you are stuck in provision culture mindset, if you're stuck there, you're used to being provided for, when things don't work, your first inclination is to moan at the council, moan at the police. Kids in our area get killed, yeah? And there's always a big meeting after. Angry, blame the police, blame the council. In every community that happens, understandably, people, we get angry, we shout, but ultimately, they can't do nothing about it. It's not just cuts, it's about reach as well, and they don't have the reach. There's an old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And the village has been outsourced, if you like. The responsibilities of us, our village, to raise our children has been passed to the council, to social services, to children's services, to all these different providers and stuff. Right? So when a kid's absent from school, it's not the responsibility of us, it's the responsibility of the social services, for example. Our dustbins, our streets, they're all done in a top-down way which don't serve this community very well. We could provide an environmental task force approach from this building, right, that did it much better than it's done now. But the problem is capacity, especially large group capacity, organisation amongst large groups, communities. When you've been schooled to only act in small groups, and the UK is very small group oriented, you have difficulty, we have difficulty as communities organising ourselves in a way that's efficient enough to get this done. This is what this is. Clodomir Santos de Moraes. I had to look all over the world, man, for something that even resembled what we were doing with Exodus, where large groups of people come in and transform spaces really quickly in a really empowering way. Wanted that in a structural way that could be done in a community like ours, that that people could recognise as a process. And we eventually found this approach called the organisation workshop, which is what it says. It's a workshop, not a talk shop, where people get organised by doing tasks. And we've piloted this after many years, 17 years it took us to actually get this brought as a concept. It come from Brazil, yeah, from Sao Paulo and Recife, and these are the places where it was born. If you look at the top, it says, this is the way to go about it, Paulo Freire. He was in prison actually as part of the Peasants' League with Clodomir Santos. So very much from the Brazilian bottom-up tradition. But the UK is a different environment, regulations, all of that. Right? So bringing that here and learning to do that, getting that here, was another big challenge for us. But we eventually managed it in 2015. 42 unemployed people from our community. It was a UK pilot of this approach. And you understand why it's so important, because large groups being organised is the missing ingredient from being able to run this community centre in a bottom-up way. Not needing the top-downers and the pyramids and the hierarchies and that. We need something different. So this was crucial for us to find something like this. That picture on the right, them guys there were part of the group of 42 unemployed, long-term unemployed, some 16 years, 20 years unemployed, came together and transformed what was a fly tip into that farm you can see on the right with an Iron Age roundhouse. Took them 6 weeks, and it was like a transformation process, Exodus style, that felt good for the soul, good for the community, and good for people's work ability. In fact, the evaluation that was officially done after that, out of 42 people who joined in it, and remember there was no one less than 2 years out of work, everyone was more than 2 years, some 16, 20. 26 went into full-time work after this. They were rejuvenated, if you like. And 14, 2 got put in prison during it. 14 remained after and are still forming social enterprises now in Marsh Farm with us. So there was Henge Farm was one of the enterprises that came out of it. This house was Marsh Farm's oldest farmhouse, which was left derelict again. And when I say oldest farmhouse, I mean the original farmhouse before our estate was a council estate, it was a farm. We occupied this, and using unemployed local labour, I being one of those, we transformed it into what's known as Marsh House. And it houses now 6 social enterprises. It's created 15 jobs in this place. One's called Fidel Gastro's, which is our social enterprise bar restaurant, Fidel Gastro. And we've got pictures inside of Sarah Park. Oh, this is a great place. Rosa Park's in there. It's just a great place. And there it is at night time, having a bit of fun. More than fun going on here. It's our social action hub, yeah? Exodus is all about bringing people together in a social space where it's warm and inviting, and then we take action on social issues. Not the other way around. Let's have a load of boring meetings and hardly anyone. Do you know what I mean? It's about bringing people together in large groups. And recently, the OW, the organisation workshop, happened in Hastings. I was blessed to be part of a team down there who have just helped with that. And now it's making the national press because, again, the results were equally impressive down there. So all in all, last but not least, now the last act of this long talk is that community centre. As I said to you, I've got some limpets on it, anti-democratic limpets I would call them. They're people who don't want membership on a popular. So currently we're having a campaign now to democratise Marsh Farm Futures and to make it so that all residents who live in the area have voting rights, membership rights, etc. And then we'll have elected trustees, not unelected trustees. And the full potential and power of this can be unleashed. So we've done this in a particular way. I'll finish now, Neil. We've done this in a particular way. And this is, I want to finish on this, yeah? If you're building democracy from the bottom up, and the back, you see my background, it's an enjoyable thing, yeah? It keeps people together like glue because everyone's loving it. Democracy, as we currently know it, is boring, man. Do you know what I'm saying? Go to a council meeting and you'll be lucky if you can stay awake in there because it's so boring. And what that does, that has the effect of reducing attendance down to the few, not the many. So Jeremy Corbyn's going, by the many, not the few. And I'm thinking, no, mate, it's too boring. People aren't going to get involved on that level. So we are renewing democracy in Marsh Farm at the moment. Yeah? So the campaigns for membership, as you can see, prepare, organise and transform. We're recruiting not only 2 street mobilisers from every road in Marsh Farm, whose job is to inspire their neighbours to attend these 3 monthly, quarterly events, people's assemblies. But we've also got what we call an artivists wing. So in Marsh Farm, artivist is what it says, art and activism mixed. So all our rebel soldiers, we've got even opera singers on Marsh Farm. It's a very musical, creative place. We're all coming together to create a quarterly people's assembly. And that people's assembly is where the decisions will be made. But the difference is it won't be boring. We're going to mix art and creativity and fun with doing civic and democratic duties. So more question time, like the BBC, than council meeting. More voting on scoreboards for who gets funding, rather than little panels who make all the decisions. So our job now is to renew democracy by making it less boring. And we've got the tools. You see, we've got the building, we've got the farm, we've got the land, we've got the machines, we've got everything. What we haven't got is broad organisation. And that's where the organisation workshop, which is already tried and tested, is going to come into it. And then we'll see a bottom-up revolution in Marsh Farm.
Thank you. Tour de force as ever. I mean, that is a very short version of a very complex story, which has involved a lot of battles. I was once asked to step in to be the interim chief executive of Marsh Farm. I'm very glad I didn't.
Talk him into it.
The one thing that Glen raised, many different techniques, we talked about them. The organisational workshop is worth looking at. I've got a few books, including that one, up in my office. It's a fascinating technique of mass organising. It was done initially in the 1960s, which is very different than many of the tools that many of us use in human development. But what I think what Glen and his many allies have done is to constantly, so I mean, you started when you were 16, I'll ask how you all now, but there's been 10 to 25 years of activism. This sort of work is a long-term thing. Social innovation is often very short-term, very quick wins. We want impact, etc. This is old school, but this is lasting old school work that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of pain at times. A lot
of fun as well, though.
A lot of fun too. Anyway, open up to questions. Questions? Nathan.
Hold on.
Thanks. I'm actually driven to this question by exactly what Neil said right now. There was a line in your song that I wrote down that said, "The only evil is fighting changing times." And I wanted to get your sense on, as an individual, you're obviously more elastic as an individual than most people will probably ever meet in our lives, but not infinitely elastic. You're going to have some ideas and times are going to change. How do you keep this from being a single generational movement? How does it, for you, become, how does it really last beyond you then, now that you're not 21?
Long way from 21, Nathan. Good question. I hope and believe and intend that the idea is, with this kind of development, is that when we in Marsh Farm achieve the democratisation and the fruits of it become obvious, so measurable, visible, and most importantly, feelable. So when people come there, even now, Nathan, people come there and they get inspired and warmed up by what's happening. And then they go back to we're part of a national community organisers movement of 20 hubs across the UK. And we're all trying different innovations on ways to regenerate and organising communities. So my answer to you would be that by virtue, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, shall we say. So when the pudding's finished and the evidence is clear, other people in other communities, adapting, of course, to their own realities on the ground, including in particular young people, actually, because the musical element of it attracts a very young audience to this kind of development. That's what's going to make it so it carries on beyond us, is that people already, there's other, as you see from Hastings, there's other communities piloting and trialling the same approaches. And our dance, the big dance, we're currently working on an old sand pit, or chalk pit actually, chalk and sand, but to transform that into a permanent festival site where that can happen on a monthly basis. And then again, not for private profit, any resources that come out of that would recycle back into the community. So I hope it will be by example, Nathan, and by people coming and feeling and changing.
Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. I have many questions. One of them is what's the impact of creativity for people to continue to participate? So I think all the dancing and later the gaming, and now that you've been doing this work for a long time, how is it playing as part of the organization and the self-organizing and in your leadership as well? Because I get the sense that you use a lot of storytelling as well.
Yeah. The creativity is an essential part of what we do. It's almost like it's too dry without it. Yeah, so for a good 3 or 4 years, we never had Fidel Castros. It was in transformation. And being honest with you, in them 3 or 4 years, it's difficult. Because without the sort of like, well, you know what I mean, without the let's go and have a good time as well, it does get difficult and very torturous, these kind of journeys, especially when you're under attack and everything you propose is opposed. But being honest, rather than having this sort of ever-present group of loads of people standing on a hill, we're all in our houses, and when we need to call, like for example, when that centre was opposed by the council and tried to build private housing on it, we went round and mobilised a petition and then a referendum, and then the masses get involved in that. So the creative part of it keeps the core group active and the people who come along to it. But I repeat, it's an essential part, not just creativity in terms of having a nice time, but being creative in terms of how do you make the process for engaging in it more culturally relevant, yeah, and culturally democratic as well. Our estate has got about 25, 30 different nationalities on it. It's a beautiful melting pot. But what you don't want is a sort of white guys dance, you know, and everyone else gets a flag on a cake or something. You want something to be culturally democratic and representative of our estate, and that's a job of work. But the cultural, creative bit of it makes it much easier because people are like, yeah, man, I'm going to play some drums. Do you know what I mean? So only last week I was speaking to a group of people who I never knew on our estate before. I'd seen them about, but they all come from Ghana. And there's about 30 of them, you know, all over the estate. And I didn't know they were a kind of music collective as well. And it was because of Gastros, because we got this space, they've come and said, can we do you know what I mean? So I think it's essential. I hope that answers what you meant, yeah?
Ali.
Thank you for the presentation. As you were facing problems from the authorities and facing pressure, how did that impact the wider local community's perception of what you were doing? And if you faced challenges, how did you overcome them and get them to also be part of the movement?
The thing is, we were and are, I would say, but were particularly back in the day, up against some really powerful forces. Like they own the local media. For example, it turned out that the guy in a nutshell, yeah, the the leader of our Labour Council turned out to be this Freemason guy. So the beer people in our town who was watching the 40% profits drop were in his ear at the lodge saying, look, you know, and it was this strange scenario where most of the councillors were good with us, but this one guy was hostile. And when we discovered what that was, we occupied the town hall and made it public knowledge, and it ended up with a 5-day discussion on the local BBC radio, and he got evicted as leader because of it. So he don't like me, as you might not be surprised to know, right? So with that it turns out he's employing the wife of the local newspaper editor on one of them, what do they call it? Not bung. It is a bung, but they don't call it that. Non-executive directorship, that was it now, right? One of them bungs, yeah? In Africa, it's a bung, trust me, but here they just call it a non-executive directorship, get 100 grand, right? So that was happening. So the forces we were up against at the media, at the TV, at every aspect, at the radio, and you know what? Through the power of, I'll give you one tiny example of what I mean. The guy who planted drugs on us, his son came and told me who his dad was working for. He was a copper, but he was actually helicopter pilot for one of the top guys at the Masonic Lodge, yeah? And how could he know that their own kids were going to come and tell us that? They couldn't know that. But we had such a far reach, and do have such a far reach into the community, that we were able to see some of that off. As you see from the public inquiry that the council eventually voted for, that was because we were able, by means like that, knowing people in the community who knew what was really going on. Half of the coppers, my brother was a copper, and they attacked my mum's pub. They just turned my mum's pub upside down and put in a load of false statements. It took us 8 years to get her pub back, to get her licence back and that. And my brother was a copper. So you can imagine that caused a big schism in Bedfordshire police. Half the police were saying, this ain't right, mate. This ain't right. What's going on? That's Tony's mum now. Do you know what I mean? So the impact on the wider community was heavy because we were front page for the worst crimes you could imagine as far as they were concerned. And of course there's people who want to believe that, and there's some people who just believe us, swallow us, fallible, gullible media believers, we call them, but there's some people who believe that, and then it took years of being proved right in court, in the court of public opinion, that before we were able to come through that. So it's very, very, I would say the answer in a nutshell is the truth is a powerful thing if you can last it out. Because there used to be a saying that said, the truth, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth's even got its shoes on. Right? And that's true back in there. But now, as soon as they utter the untruth, there's a load of cyber people, straight away the truth's getting its shoes on. It was harder back then. So it's about endurance and the community, and the truth's a powerful thing.
Hi, thank you. This was awesome. I actually built a bit of my business plan around a community enterprise development space, trying to reutilize to try to reimagine underutilized spaces from a community point of view. So I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I want to know, like, are you sticking around so we could just have informal chats or come to our dinner?
Yeah, I'm coming to dinner.
Okay. I was just wanting to know that, so thank you. I don't have a succinct question right now. I'm still percolating. So maybe at dinner I'll grab you.
I like them type of questions anyway.
I was wondering, you are quite a big community. How do you manage conflicts within the community or within the movement?
Cool. Conflicts. Any group of people, you're going to get conflicts, isn't it? And we've had our big share of those. Happily, with hindsight, as much as the pain of conflict, and especially what I'd call spiritual divorce, our group's been through a spiritual divorce. When we succeeded with our land battle, and all of a sudden it becomes you've got means, some people want to commercialise that. They want to turn it into private gain. And that caused big divisions in our group and what I'd call a spiritual divorce, because some of the people were still on, like, the same principles we started on, and others kind of drifted away, partially due to the pressure we were put under, the attacks that we were put under. And in the end, some people got on, look, I'm fed up with this selflessness. It's about me now. Do you know what I mean? The pressure leads people to that. And that led to conflicts, big conflicts, which caused us to divide as a group. And some of us carry on with the Marsh Farm thing and some of us not. And it was that ability to carry on, regardless of the conflict. So if we have to split, we have to split. If we can stay together and resolve them, as long as they weren't of principle, then. And then you've got your more nagging conflicts, which are like domestic conflicts within the group. They're the hardest ones to deal with, because you can have ideology written on your T-shirt, and then in the privacy of your own house, do you know what I mean? And that kind of internal, personal conflict is difficult. And I think, being honest with you, I've been through 2 or 3 experiences in this where certain organisations have formed, and because there was marriages involved and that sort of thing, and when that gets put under strain, the whole project gets put under strain because of domestic fall down and that. And the only thing I could say to you is that, like with all conflict resolution, if there's people in the group who can help and support and not judge it and be involved on a kind of, I'm kind of all right at that, I often get called on for that kind of thing to mediate between people. I think in a community, if you're in a community that doesn't count in conflict resolution before you start, you're going to fall over. So be aware of it, account for it, build it in, and think about how these things are being dealt with. And to finish, love is the key as well. We love each other, ultimately. Even the people I've fell out with along the way, I salute so much what they've done, that we could never fall out. We just don't get on. Do you know what I mean? No, that's different. No. We had him out, actually. We removed him.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I was curious about what you said about, in the UK specifically, that people learn to only organize themselves in small groups. So I was wondering if you can talk a bit more how that's happening and why, and also like if you have any ideas how that can be changed. So how can this larger group capacity to organize larger groups can be built?
That's a brilliant question, right? Because that's the main. If you're going to crack the monopoly, we have to know the answer to that. And as I said earlier, when we got involved in Marsh Farm and the New Deal for communities and that, you start looking at the British regeneration industry's shelves for ways which some way reflect large group organising, and there isn't any. It's the truth. I looked long and hard, and we had people from Just Steel and that looking, people I know and respect who've been in this game for a long time. And what tends to happen in the UK, I'll give you an example, when we were going to the Department for Communities with a proposal to do this 100 people, setting up loads of small enterprises at once as one big enterprise umbrella. So therefore learn organisation, division of labour and all of that within large groups. The civil service response was, well, can't you just do it with 10 people just to prove it works? And we go, no, you're missing the trick. It's about large group. Yeah, but can't you do it with 10 to prove it works? You know what I mean? Like, risk. All risk averseness. I'd say opposition dressed up as risk averseness. So the answer to your question, I think, is the OW and similar methods, if there are, I still don't know another one, but we've done 2 of these in the UK now. And our ambition is to do 6 of them, and it'll be embedded here. It'll be done. It'll be here. Because the answer is you have to change the paradigm, man. You have to change the way people don't want to do big stuff to knowing that only doing big stuff is going to make the transformation we're all seeking, yeah? And so, sorry.
No, it's part about control, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you have lots of small groups, divide and conquer, the book I was recommending earlier, Thinking Small, gives me a US sort of answers some of these questions. Because a lot of practices that New Deal and other huge organisations use, including me and my own, come out of US counterinsurgency work in Indonesia, Philippines and Vietnam. I was appalled by that. That's why the book is so good. So these sort of approaches, I mean, the reason why he was in prison, but he was a respected academic, a sociologist in Brazil, it's because he was a danger. He felt he was a danger because he was mobilising thousands of peasants to take control of their lives. The key thing about this technique is not necessarily the end product, so they may build a community centre or a farm.
That's not the point.
The point is learning to organise.
Yeah.
Learning to organise. And crucially, the people like him who set this up, the experts, architects, the engineers and builders, couldn't engage unless people who are doing the process asked them for help.
Exactly.
It's reversing. Yeah?
We call that own empowerment, not empowerment. Like empowerment's something you do to people, like embrace. But own empowerment, so does that answer your question, yeah? The paradigm has to change within development because like Neil says, they're scared of it.
I was wondering, how do you keep the perception in the community that you're independent when you start to work more closely with the council and rent out space to the police and stuff like that? Like, when I was younger, I worked at a youth radio station. It was quite a radical organisation, but obviously the government and the coppers and the university all wanted a piece of it, so they gave us money and we had to put their logo on stuff, and then people assumed that we were working for them, which was obviously bullshit. So how do you make sure that people understand that in your work?
That's a good question as well, but I think, for one, I wouldn't have their logo on our things at all, right? For not a chance of that. But for two, even last week, 2 days ago, if you look at my Facebook, Neil, we had to be down the town hall and flood the town hall with like 100 people because it has a demand for an old student block which is sat empty for 3 years and there's people dying on the street. And the council have been giving it all the usual prejudiced views about homeless people. Oh, there'll be crime in the area and all of that, to not allow an application by local homeless support group to turn that into somewhere where people don't die anymore. And because they refused it, or recommended refusal of it, we mobilised last week and got 100 people down there. And it was quite rowdy, and it's quite demanding, and we won. They capitulated. So that kind of keep it fresh, yeah? Keep a battle with them, yeah? Because there's plenty to battle about. So if anyone ever said to me, here's a fund, but you can't fight, don't piss the council off, whatever you do. Wouldn't even dream of taking that. Do you know what I mean? If it's got those kind of conditions to it. And plus, funding for me has to have an out strategy. It's like, if it's designed to keep you fund independent, it's a bad fund. Whereas if it's something where what we call key from the jailer, if it gives you a key to be self-sufficient, stand on your feet. So I think it's a mixture of keeping it fresh with the healthy conflict, so they know who we are, they know where we are, and our background as well, because we, you know what I mean, people naturally know where we are with it because they've experienced this throughout the years with us. Yeah? So I think we're quite lucky in that way. Part of the demonisation, if you like, probably another half of that is that people trust us, you know, from the more excluded sections of the community.
This is because we're going into our research phase, and you spoke about a survey that you did in your community to plug in whatever the finances that were going out. Could you just maybe elaborate a little bit more about how exactly you got the answers, and how maybe like how much of candor they had when they spoke about how much they were spending and all of that?
Good question.
And also maybe about accountability now in terms of financing in your organizations as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, when we did this survey, which we actually called it at the time LES, Local Economic Survey, and we've realised after should have called it spending, because economics is much wider than money, if it truly is economics, yeah, right? So when we put this together, we wanted to know how much comes in and how much goes out, so we could work out what we could trap to create jobs. But we were thinking people ain't going to want to tell us how much they're earning in their household and things like that and where they spend it. So we anonymised the answers. You didn't give us a survey back with your name on it. You just gave us a survey back, and it went into a box which we had on the door of us of loads of them. So it was kind of anonymous. But also, because we lived there, and when we're knocking, we're saying, look, if they don't know us already, we say, well, I'm from Winchester, I'm from up there. We're doing a survey of ourselves, neighbours, yeah, in order to, and we'd explain to them, we had a little one-sider, which explained to them this is about job creation, the amount of money that's running out of our community. So people bought into the idea of why we're doing this, particularly young people with no jobs and that. And we'd give an example, I'll give you one example which we put in there, was we found out that we as a community, 9,000 people, 3,000 houses, spend 1.6 million a year just on fast food takeaway, just on that. And when we showed people that money gets spent in 12 different outlets which aren't on Marsh Farm, and there's no fast food outlet on Marsh Farm, if we were to open one and trap 20% of that spend, that would create 12 local jobs. I'm thinking, well, fast food ain't good for you, but there's no be fast food and skint as well, so you might as well make our own fast food, you know? So it was people buying into that idea. And we weren't, to be honest, I was amazed that we didn't get any resistance once we'd explained why we were there. People were very happy to do it. But I'll give you a word of caution in terms of people and communities. When we came back the first night, it was like, wow, everyone's up for it. No, only one person said, don't be nosy, I'm not telling you. Only one person. We was like amazed. But what we'd done, we dropped the survey with them and said, we'll come back next day, pick it up. Because it said, like, what do you spend on bread, shopping, washing powder, dog food, all of that. Because we want to know everything, yeah, that we could set up. And everyone was there, yeah. And when we went back the next day, all full of fire because everyone was on it, we're knocking, and I reckon people were behind the sofa going, oh, it's that survey bloke. Do you know what I mean? Because they hadn't done it, right? And when they do open the door, oh, sorry, mate, I meant to do it, but life happened, you know what I mean? So we realised, oh, boy, and that was a good half of them, more than half were doing that. And the other quarter weren't in, so it was a bit drama for us. So what we did, we went back, tried it again and said, look, can we leave this with you, and your enthusiasm, we'll come back in an hour. When we've been round the whole street, we'll be back in an hour. And then when we did that, we went back and people are doing this at the door when they're giving it, hold on mate, yeah, right, here you go, right. So there was a will to do it, but capturing that and not letting it evaporate into EastEnders or something was important. So a mixture of wanting to, supporting why we're doing it, getting that over, and going back quick to get the responses.
One more question. Yeah, very deep. Michelle will run.
There you go. I just wanted to touch, so you're talking about your kind of hubs and kind of sharing your best practice. How do you make sure that doesn't end up mutating into kind of a franchise model and you become that kind of industry of meeting service needs that you kind of so despise? Like, what keeps that personal element and that adaptation from happening and from it not becoming just a product that gets rolled out?
Yeah, can I first say, it's not that I despise that's a strong word, but and I don't want to give that impression, yeah? I think there's some service provision which is fantastic, yeah? And it works in the way it is. It could be better with community involvement, but works okay. But what I don't like is the, as I explained earlier on, the kind of displacement of local energy where we could do something and we're not allowed to because there's a vested interest doing it. Sorry, what was your question again? Sorry.
So just how do you prevent
becoming right? Right. Well, I think the answer to that is, when I said with regional variations here, the thing about this, what we're doing, is about bottom up, by the people, for the people. So it can only be done by local people, for themselves, for ourselves. So that's hard to outsource that to anybody. You can share a model, if you want to call it a franchise even, you know. We could share our Mephopoly model with people, but it'd have in their squares, it wouldn't have what we've got, it'd have their own squares. So it's very much something that, you know, they can't do what we do, but I can't do for you in your community what you can do. It has to be you who does it. So when we go to Newcastle and different places, we always say to people, you know, we're not here to do anything for you other than to help you, scaffold you, if you like, in terms of doing it for yourself. So it's kind of like, I'm all right with that kind of franchise where it's by local people, for local people, and no one else can do it.
What's your driving analogy? Remember that last time?
About what?
Your driving analogy.
When I talk about driving, you talk about if you're learning to learn, when you learn, like what we call Teflon training, yeah? If you sit in a classroom and listen to things, I forget it. I don't know about you. Well, obviously you lot don't, but learning by doing, so riding a bike, driving a car, it's the car that teaches you, not the teacher. The instructor's there, but feeling the car, when you drop your clutch and that's what will teach you how to drive. And that, in scientific terms, that's called objectivized activity, where the object teaches you. So I think what you mean by that is that only local communities, by learning by themselves, can arrive at where we are. And you can't outsource that because it's by necessity, it's at the locality that it does it. Is that right?
Okay.
Glen, thank you very much for shedding so much light on community development. We are all here from different paths, but what we are passionate about and what we have designed for is to address different social issues. Yeah. And your story has been very real, very practical, and it's been very inspirational. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'd like to give my personal thanks to Glen, because, as always, I mean, there's a lot more depth and nuance to this story. I can't tell you how much depth, how many examples of action, organisation, sheer bloody-mindedness on occasions. I remember the story where you chased a minister to his home church.
Yeah, man.
A government minister somewhere in the north. They camped out in the churchyard until he actually spoke to you.
3 days in his churchyard.
3 days. Glen will be around after this, and also at dinner. More than willing to chat to people. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you.
The rest